very good morning, evening, afternoon, from depending on wherever you're joining. Thank you on behalf of CUT International, I would like to thank everybody for joining this webinar. As you might be knowing, that CUTS International, a 40-year-old global public policy research and advocacy group, has also launched the Indo-Pacific Civil Society Forum. This is a coalition of civil society organizations in the larger Indo-Pacific region, not just from the Western Pacific Ocean to our shores, which is the Indian Ocean, but also the eastern coast of Africa, which we, sitting in India, see as an important part of the larger Indo-Pacific region. So I, Purushendra Singh, again, on behalf of CUTS, would like to welcome everybody to this timely and important webinar. CUTS, the background of this webinar has been CUTS recently came out with a briefing paper that was on India's Indo-Pacific strategy, broadly aligning and looking at what are strategies, what are outlooks, what are initiatives, and why do we need a strategy going forward. Now, as we envision India becoming a developed country or Viksit Bharat by 2047, and mostly the trade and South Asia and Southeast Asia being at the heart of the global trade, this region becomes even more important now as we look on towards 2047 and way forward. This session, we are going to have it for 45 minutes, which is going to be followed by 15 minutes Q&A. I'll request all the participants who have joined us, if you could please put on your questions in the Q&A chat box given below. Now, setting up some house announcement, we encourage the speakers to keep their cameras on and phones on either on silent mode or flight mode. This session is being recorded and later on it's going to be released on CUT's YouTube channel. With this, I would like to invite the speakers of our inaugural webinar. Admiral Sunil Lanba, former Chief of Naval Staff. Rear Admiral Katsuya Yamamoto, Program Director and Senior Research Fellow at Security Studies Program at Sasakawa Peace Foundation, Japan. Captain Sarabjit Parmar, Distinguished Fellow at the United Service Institution of India and also CSDR, New Delhi. Dr. Pooja Bhatt, Associate Professor, Jindal School of International Affairs. Dr. Monish, Tourangbam, Director, Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. And lastly, Dr. Yoichiro Sato, Professor, Ritsumeikan, Asia Pacific University. He's yet to join us. I'm hoping he would join soon. Now, moving on, I would like to ask Akshay if you can bring up the presentation. All right, moving on. As I mentioned, this webinar is based on a briefing paper that we had come out, broadly outlining, and as we all know, Indo-Pacific sits as a focal point of global geopolitics, reshaping international relations and economic growth dynamics. Moving on. Next slide, please. So we are looking at the strategy, policy, and outlook vision. As you might see on the screen, strategy is what we are going to be later be discussing furthermore, which is a focused, actionable plan looking at a long-term national interest or perspective. In comparison to policy, which is framework guiding action for specific goals, and vision or outlook, which we already have, Indo-Pacific outlook vision for engagement in the region without detailed objectives. Next slide, please. All right, this is a vision that we already have in place and policies. I would not read in detail since we have experts in this panel discussion. Next slide, please. Factors driving India's embrace of the Indo-Pacific. There has been initial hesitation, as we all know, and was only at the Shangri-La dialogue that Prime Minister of India, he had mentioned why Indo-Pacific region, particularly with regard to the strategic convergence, needs to be looked at. Of course, the dragon in the room, that is China. There have been border tensions, not just on terms of land borders, but also in the maritime sector as well. Then as we have gone forward, there have been strategic partnerships. And lastly, maintaining strategic autonomy. Next slide. There have been few recommendations lined up in this briefing paper, which I'll share the link later on. It's also up there on our website, which you may have a look at. Next slide. Now, much has been talked about the Indo-Pacific, which is the confluence of the two oceans or the two seas, as rightly pointed out by late Shinzo Abe in 2007 in Indian Parliament. But not much has been talked about the Indian Ocean region, which has been a crucial significance point of the larger Indo-Pacific region. Next slide. So lastly, thank you. I would like to thank two of the people who have also given their insight, that is Dr. Pooja Bhatt and Captain Sarabjit Parmar, for their valuable insight, apart from the two researchers, Mihir Shekhar Bhonsle and Dhruv Bansal, who have contributed to this paper. The link is given here, and we're now open to the panel discussion, which further ado, Admiral Lanba, thank you for joining us. And given as the 23rd Chief of Indian Naval Staff, I'll directly dive into the question. Why do you think Indo-Pacific is strategically important to India? And what approach should we be taking, should India be taking in the larger Indo-Pacific strategy? Over to you.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. I think the Indo-Pacific strategy or India's outlook was laid out, as you mentioned, by Prime Minister Modi in the Shangri-La Dialogue speech in 2018, where he described India's reach of the Indo-Pacific, which is from the east coast of Africa to the west coast of the Americas. And he also laid out the fundamental tenets of what India wants or to do in the Indo-Pacific is a rule-based order, free and open oceans with freedom of navigation. The geostrategic, geoeconomic center of gravity in the world has shifted to the Indo-Pacific, or you can say the Asian landmass. Almost 60% of the population of the world resides in this area. The largest, if you combine the economies of all the Asia, will be the largest economies in the world. The majority of the 10 largest military forces in the world are based in this region. And it's not only the geostrategic and the geoeconomic focus, also the writ of the United States over the years has slowly reduced in the Indo-Pacific. And also the technological edge which the West and the United States enjoyed over the rest of the world, that gap has been bridged. Cutting edge technologies, whether you look at AI, quantum computing, and other fields, this thing. So the focus of the world has shifted to the Indo-Pacific. I know there are also focuses in Europe, the war between Russia and Ukraine, and in West Asia or Middle East, which is happening now. Syria is going to be a new outlook. We don't know which way Syria is going to go. So the focus of Indo-Pacific, and India's focus is also on the Indo-Pacific. And for the well-being of India and the economic growth of India, I think the Indo-Pacific is the most important region for India. It is also host to the very important sea lines of communication which link the East and the West, and which passes very close to the Indian subcontinent. And we have a very important role to play in ensuring continuous flow of traffic in the sea lines of communication which join the Pacific and the West through the Indian Ocean. Okay, almost a lakh ships transit this area practically every year. We have very important economic linkages to nations in the Pacific. Our large trading partners, Japan, South Korea, including China and the ASEAN, are important for India's economic growth and some segment of our energy requirements are also met from the Indo-Pacific region. This is a fundamental reason why we need to focus and have a strategy in the Indo-Pacific. What have we done to this? Our engagements with our partners, like-minded partners, have increased. Quad has been revived, and since 2017, we have included one of the oldest exercise, bilateral exercise. Malabar has now included the members of the Quad. You have now it's become a quadrilateral between United States, Australia, Japan, and India, and the exercise takes place annually. Both are bilateral linkages. Our oldest maritime exercise, which we celebrated the 25th anniversary in 2018, is with Singapore. We have very close relationships with the countries in the ASEAN, especially very close relations with Vietnam, where we have also worked with them to improve them maritime capabilities, given them a line of credit to acquire ships from India, and also trained their crew to man the same kilo-class submarines. So our levels of engagement with the countries in Asia have gone by leaps and bounds. Like in your slide, you said mission-based deployments and all that. So the Indian Navy is practically present to ensure safe navigation and open seas in the Indo-Pacific region. So to cut the long story short, is economically very important for India's growth and growing stature that we have a strategy and a policy for the Indo-Pacific. And this can only work when we work together with like-minded nations and partners to ensure rule-based order and freedom of navigation is followed by nations in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you very much for bringing in and laying the why Indo-Pacific is significantly important for India. And even going forward, apart from trade, climate, and other minilaterals, this region becomes important. In your presentation, you had also mentioned that how the vacuum has been created with uh, reduction of power of USA in this particular region. To answer the same question, now I'd like to bring in Captain Sarabjit Parmar. Uh, as we all know, we are 12th of December when we move into the new year, that is on 20th of January in particular, we are going to see a new administration coming in Washington DC. How do you see the Trump 2.0 and with relevance to the Indo-Pacific region? Over to you.
Thanks, Guru. It's always a pleasure to engage with Cuts, and especially it's a great panel. It's difficult to follow Admiral Lamba's overall coverage, but thank you, sir, for covering the main pointers which will give us some guidance. So, Puru, I'm going to start with Sagar. It's important to understand Sagar because there is a connectivity between our US engagements and Sagar, and that's part of what you had asked me to do. So that Sagar was first uttered in 2015, and that too, in Mauritius. It was sort of to be that the term has now gained, a lot of ascendancy, is importance. And the beauty of the term is security for growth and all in the region is you can apply it anywhere. So when the Prime Minister mentioned Sagar, he did not mention the region. He just spoke to it as, let's call it a vision as of now, right? And therefore, you can call it as the umbrella vision of India's Indo-Pacific strategy or India's approach to the Indo-Pacific, since we don't have a strategy document. And there are several policies, components, initiatives that cover three main aspects: diplomatic, economic, and military. And let's have a look at them one by one so that we can put things in context. So first is, let's look at the neighborhood first policy. And I dare say it's not doing too well presently. I mean, for the first time, I think we have all our four land borders are active, and of course, the maritime borders are also gaining that much more importance. So the question here is, have we ignored the neighborhood while engaging the broader Indo-Pacific? That's something we need to look at. Then, of course, is the Act East policy, the Look West, the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, seven pillars which you mentioned, heavily undersubscribed, if you ask me. There's a lot of more nations who can come on board. And if it works, if the work was supposed to be based on the contours of the East Asia Summit, then we need a driver, and that driver can only be India, if you ask me. Then another approach is ASEAN centrality, a little bit more on that a little later. And then, of course, is Quad, the host of engagements, the initiatives, whatever we're doing with Quad. And then is the number of minilaterals that India engages in or other nations engage in, spanning both the IOR and the Indo-Pacific. So if you put this all together, these are the avenues on which India's Indo-Pacific strategy is supposed to work out. And some of these are going well, some not so well. And initially, when India looked at a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, then there needs to be an amalgamation of effort and drive to that common aim. And India is the only nation who first used inclusive. And if you read the various narratives that are coming out from especially Japan and Australia, the word inclusive is gaining more momentum. The US does not mention it, but the engagement factors that the US engages in it indicates an inclusive sort of an approach. So, therefore, the need for an Indo-Pacific strategy, especially for India, that will link all the engagements or initiatives I've just mentioned, would initially, it optimizes efforts in areas of diplomacy, economics, and military engagements, and therefore links all these together. Where a certain initiative or approach has a gap, it is possible that another initiative can cover it. For example, if there's a gap in IPOI and your Act East policy sort of looks into it in that particular region, then you have a cover. So there needs to be a little overlap. We need to, therefore, I think it's important to have an Indo-Pacific strategy going and that optimizes these efforts. And that's the part on the Sagar approach and the connect to Indo-Pacific. So let's look at Trump 2.0, as you said. And let me take you back to 2019 when the Indo-Pacific Strategy Report by the US Department of Defense was published. So it emphasized three aspects: preparedness, partnerships, and promotion of a network region to realize a free and open, safe, secure, and prosperous region. And Trump had said this in Vietnam. That's the walk we started down there. And when you look at the 2019 Shared Vision State Department document of a free and open Indo-Pacific, it also spoke as a vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific in which all countries prosper side by side as sovereign, independent states. Each word has a meaning, so we need to look at it specifically. Certain convergences is this document said that while ASEAN serves as the backbone of regional political and security discussions, many lateral engagements offer nimble ways to coordinate with like-minded partners. And I'm a big fan of many laterals, and I think there is enough proof that many laterals, especially trilaterals, are able to work solutions where larger number of nations together will not be able to do so. And this aligns with India's approach on ASEAN centrality and minilaterals, which I mentioned earlier. The document also mentions the 2019 document alignment with India's Act East policy and to work with India and address shared challenges and advance a shared vision. So this is where Trump's administration in 2019 looked at the Indo-Pacific when it came out with various issues. Just as a comparison, the 2022 Indo-Pacific strategy document under Biden also visualized the region as free and open, more connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. So there are certain convergences on that approach, but the objectives are only marginally different. There are two main differences. While the 2019 strategy, especially the Department of Defense one, devoted separate sections to Russia, China, and North Korea, and this is important because Trump's approach is going to be a little more hardliner, especially on China. The 2022 strategy did not mention Russia at all. One. Of course, now there will be a mention because Ukraine is back in the picture. But do remember, even at that point in time, the 2014 invasion and activities of Russia in that region were not too much in the past. Surprisingly, North Korea was mentioned just once, and references to China was spread all across the section. But the difference is 2019 had a more focused approach on certain challenge nations, which they were what the document looked at. Let me get back to the three areas of preparedness, partnerships, and promotion of a network region. So, preparedness was achieving peace through strength, and the document spoke of a joint force to win any conflict. I'm not sure if that would be followed at this point in time, but let me engage it a little later. And the thought process was the US, along with allies and partners, would ensure combat credible forces forward posture in the region. With the recent activities in the South China Sea, there may be a bigger push by Trump in this, and where India comes in, we'll have to see. Partnerships looked at network of allies and partners, a force multiplier to achieve peace, deterrence, and interoperable warfighting capability. Admiral Lanba has mentioned the number of exercises we do, around 40 plus is my last figure I did for institutionalized bilateral and multilateral exercises the Navy engages in. The other two, Army and the Air Force, equally are also active in many of their engagements. And a network region was a security architecture to uphold the international rules-based order. So you see these words keep coming back, but specifically under Trump 2.0, I think there's going to be more expectation from India. So when you look at the geographical as a region of Indo-Pacific, which the US looks at, especially in the 2019 documents that came under Trump's first 1.0 administration, the area stops at the western shores of India. So is it that the US is going to ignore the part between where we look at our look west policy and therefore more expectations from India, specifically in the IOR? I do remember in the 2019 document, Trump administration called China a revisionist power, and the Biden administration subsequently called it the sole competitor capable of challenging the stable and open free world order. Therefore, there's more expected from India to address the challenge of China in the Indian Ocean region, which will again leave the US little free to battle with the problems that emerge east of the Malacca Strait. There will be an expectation of more activism from India and West Asia and a path of restoration of stability. There are many issues which are held up there. IMEC is one, I2U2 trilateral or minilateral is another. There needs to be that restoration. And then, of course, therefore, the US administration will continue to bolster India's capabilities to address the China challenge with the same expectation to increase that in the broader Indo-Pacific. So we can expect that India would have to operate more in the Indo-Pacific, and there would be an emphasis, therefore, on technology and building capabilities, emphasis on ISET, INDOSEX are two examples I can give you. There will be more momentum on defense cooperation. I'll give you the example of the ship repair agreements in the end. And of course, we may be expected to participate more as a CMF member. And that's something that I think we need to look at. So the order of the day would be to stabilize the Indian Ocean region. Therefore, look at your neighborhood policy first, and we may get some support from the US at this. Look at stable connectivity and supply chains. Locks have been mentioned. The Red Sea is in disarray right now. When we look at locks, please remember, and Pooja and I were in a discussion in the morning, that you also have submarine cable locks or seabed locks, which are equally important. Therefore, there will be emphasis on that. We can expect a push in Quad engagements and rise in expectations to achieve a measure of success in specified areas. Overall, there will be more India-US engagements, with India expected to play a more active role in the IOR as well as the broader Indo-Pacific. And therefore, one aspect which I said I'll mention is, for example, is the ship repair agreement between India and the US. If the US amends its legislature and starts looking at the repair of US warships in the region, this will broaden the ambit to include also nations like South Korea, Japan, and Australia, expand the ambit in the Indo-Pacific. For the India-US relations, this will indicate more trust while enhancing capabilities and could encourage more such cooperative engagements in the region. Till the time we don't see the new strategy documents coming out from under the Trump administration, that's your national security strategy, defense strategies, and an Indo-Pacific strategy. These are the issues that we can look at, but these documents would be able to throw more light on what we can expect and what is India expected to do. And I'll pause here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for leaving us with some questions, some thoughts. And I would agree to some extent with you with this, especially backsliding of multilateral, and we are seeing the rise of minilaterals. It's quicker with the less of administrative work, bureaucratic hurdles to move and work. And furthermore, we can expect India's role definitely increasing in the larger Indian Ocean region, which US for over 2 decades has been pushing. Now, finally, I guess India should realize this, and we should do much more in this. As you mentioned, China has been named again and again, much more than any other country. I would now move to our next expert who has also written a very beautiful book, Nine Dashed Lines, and who is an expert in the South China Sea related matters. Over to you, Dr. Bhatt. How do you see China's role in the South China Sea, and how do we position India in this region? So far, we have been keeping a little away from this particular region, directly engaging. Uh, Over to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, CUTS International and Puru, for inviting me again to talk on Indo-Pacific issues. I'm always happy to discuss more on this. So, going directly to your question about China's rise and its impact, I just want to take everyone a bit like few years back when the China's rise was becoming a issue and how it impacted the Indo-Pacific narrative. When we talk about 2015, 16, 17, when the entire, Indo-Pacific discussion were going on, it was just not the US involvement in this. It was also China's rise in the Indo-Pacific region. We can see the, BRI happening at the same time. We were seeing the Trump's administrations coming in the power and then talking about reinvigorating Quad at the same time, taking China as the major threat. But at the same time, there was India's own involvement in the region, and we had these series of, vision documents that came out, Sagar and Sagarmala, followed by Sagarmala. So it was a combination of factors that were happening at the same time when the Indo-Pacific vision was being formulated. So to say that whether China's rise led to the formation of Indo-Pacific might not be entirely correct. Yes, China was a major factor why countries could see China as a threat bilaterally. Each of these Indo-Pacific countries and Quad countries were seeing China at the same time as a threat. So it brought them together during the same time. But I think each of these countries had a different understanding of China because of their, economic and bilateral relations with the country. So that is something I want to start my conversation, that China's rise might be a binding factor. It was not the final reason why Indo-Pacific countries have come together. And another reason why I say that, because the conversations when the Quad also started, Indo-Pacific conversations started, they were very military focused, defense focused. And if you see over the years and the last Wilmington declaration that came out in September, the scope has shifted just from defense to larger aspects of security, including AI, space, human security, maritime security. So now I think Indo-Pacific countries have realized that focusing on regional concerns and security, aspirations is more important. Economic development, sustainable growth, clean energy, other regional aspirations. And I think US as well as most of the Indo-Pacific countries, including India, are now vying for it. And that's how our narrative has been shifted over the years. But coming to the Indo-Pacific strategy, and I'm very glad that you showed that initial slide difference between vision and strategy. India has a vision at the moment, and there has been a structural and historical averseness towards, having a strategy in terms of defense strategy, nuclear strategy. We never had a strategy per se, because it requires a lot more commitment and it puts a lot of resources which we might not be ready with at the moment to have a strategy. So I think in the coming times, I do not see that India would have a strategy, while it should have it, because it provides a direction for all the units within a country and to come together and collaborate. But at the same time, I don't see it happening at the moment. Okay, now coming to the second part of South China Sea. So South China Sea was always important for India. I think Indian Navy has been going to South China Sea country ports like Vietnam and Philippines as early as in 1960. So it was not a new thing for us to venture, though we never had a very South China Sea per se foreign policy or any military or policy regarding that. But in the coming last years, we have had the South China Sea coming in the discourse of Indian, when the leaderships have spoken about why South China Sea is important, and we have seen again and again our our foreign minister, our prime minister have spoken about South China Sea, the importance of South China Sea, and why it is important for Indo-Pacific stability and growth. And so I think that discussion has come back to South China Sea. Major reason being our trade goes through it, and now we are looking maritime as from the trade perspective a lot. So always the flag will follow the trade. If your trade is there, you have to have your, military forces, following the trade to make them secure, the slots secure. So I think that is the strategic importance, one part of it. Another region is we have realized that India, as far as Sagar talks about, is, security and growth of all in the region. So every country needs to be to feel secure in order for the region to, develop together, because no country alone can develop together. It is in this direction that India is trying to have good relations with each of the Indo-Pacific countries, and we have a lot of engagements going on. Some of them have been mentioned. Military exercises, joint production is one of the sides of it. We're also getting into a lot of minilaterals and multilaterals with in each of these countries at the bilateral level, at the multilateral level. So there are a series of engagements. Having said that, I would also want to end at this note that in the future, the Indo-Pacific strategy might be less governed by the US involvement, because we have seen vacillating responses of subsequent US governments within the region. But I think India per se will guide the Indo-Pacific strategy more, just as it's the Indian Ocean strategy, or the Indian Ocean vision, because India understands the region better. But at the same time, how Captain Parmar also mentioned, our relationship with our neighbors will also matter, because India's maritime strategies, in my opinion, is not seen very well by our neighbors. And first of all, we have to maintain our relations with our neighbors. Once stabilize that, then we can have more acceptance of our maritime policies toward the regions, Indo-Pacific and Indian Ocean region. With that, I would like to end. Thank you.
Thank you very much for laying out not just traditional issues, also non-traditional security issues, and also the smaller disaster management, climate change, and related areas which the smaller island nations that are highly affected by. In the Indo-Pacific, in the Pacific, and also in the Indian Ocean region, these are some of the concerns, major highlighting concerns, not hardcore security, but the related to disaster management, climate change, and like this. Moving on, as you mentioned, we need to have a larger presence. India needs to have a larger presence in the with the smaller islands also. Just as a fact and a figure, only China has their consulates or diplomatic engagements in all of the six nation island countries in the Indian Ocean region. This has been like a home ground, but we have been slogging in this region, which India needs to do up more. Moving on to now India's engagement with ASEAN. Now I would like to bring in Dr. Monish. Dr. Monish, we since early 1990s we have been looking towards the east. Now, since 2014, we have started acting towards the east, and mostly our initiatives, such as Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, has been uh, linked mostly to what is India going to do with ASEAN countries. Over to you. How do you see this progressing? And if we have at all, if we have a India's Indo-Pacific strategy, what role do ASEAN play in this region? Over to you.
Thank you, Puru, and Cuts International for the opportunity. And it's pleasure to be with an focused panel today. As I often do, I'll carry off from what Captain Parmar said, which he touched upon Trump 2.0, and I'll try to sort of link Trump 2.0, what India is doing with Southeast Asia, and the larger geopolitics of Southeast Asia as such. I think we can. The word has been overused these days, but I think we do stand at an inflection point. And what is that inflection point? It's an opportune moment to talk about the AEST policy having completed 10 years, starting from 2014. But it's also a very important time to talk about the AEST policy because it's not in a very great shape as far as the near future is concerned. and I think some of which Captain Parmar did alluded to, which is the neighborhood policy. And as we talk of AEST policy, both the maritime and the continental aspect of it, I think we are essentially also talking about our Eastern neighborhood policy. And I think apart from the regime crisis that we are encountering right now in Bangladesh, which I think directly affects how our AEST policy plays out both in the continental land border sense and also in the maritime sense. If you look at the security of the maritime corridors that passes through from Southeast Asia onto Cox's Bazar and leads to the Chittagong Tracts and touches the northeast of India. And I think these are very, very important land and maritime corridors as far as both traditional and non-traditional security threats are concerned. And we have had a little bit of that experience in the past in terms of how these corridors have been used. So as we think of opening new corridors that connect trade and businesses, that connect people, the problem is those are the same corridors that are going to be used for also uh, many of the security threats that we continue to face in the region. So I think one of the first points that I would like to point out is in terms of thinking through about India's geographic priorities. What are India's geographic priorities? The Indo-Pacific is very huge, but if we think of strategy in the clear sense, it just boils down to an alignment between aspirations and your capabilities. What do you have? And what are you going to do with the things that you have? And are they aligned in some sense or the other? So as we talk about the global South and South-South cooperation and other kind of more broader global aspirations and the larger Indo-Pacific, I think it all boils down to caring about the global South, which is nearest to us, which is our neighborhood, and also the immediate strategic priorities in the Indian Ocean and also in South Asia. So I think why Southeast Asia or AEST policy is so important is because it sort of reflects the shared economic and security space between South and Southeast Asia. And I think India's Northeast stands as a very important juncture in that point, in the sense that if you look at it, there are a lot of opportunities, but if you look at it, there are a lot of threats and risks involving this shared economic and security space. And I think to a large extent, this is something that Kalinga has been thinking through, and we have had webinars in terms of looking at sub-regions within the Indo-Pacific. And obviously, Southeast Asia is a very important sub-region in the sense of how it connects two regional security complexes, which is South Asia and Southeast Asia. And we had two webinars where we just listened to South Asian speakers and Southeast Asian speakers, that what is their view of the Indo-Pacific? Do they align with our view of the Indo-Pacific? And very, very interesting points did come up about what Nepal thinks of the Indo-Pacific, and what one of the important things that came up talking to six Southeast Asian speakers from six different countries of Southeast Asia was this murmur or loud murmur within the ASEAN that at the time when everyone ascribes to ASEAN centrality as, to the unspoken holy grail of the Indo-Pacific that everyone adheres to. But we still need to think through in terms of what Asian centrality really means in our own strategy. Do the Americans really think and implement ASEAN centrality? And the ASEAN people often talk about the fact that when you talk about ASEAN centrality, you push in Quad and AUKUS. So, does it really align with the way you talk about ASEAN centrality? And I think we may not agree with what the Southeast Asian speakers are saying, but the fact that they're speaking about it is good enough for us to think through in terms of to, how to temper any murmur of, any loopholes and gaps in this centrality that we are talking about. So that's one important point that we need to sort of think through. And I think when we talk of sub-regions, I have been doing some work on it, which is the Mekong sub-region. And I think this is a very important sub-region because we have had a Ganga-Mekong cooperation since 2000. But if you look at the kind of inertia which is involved in the Ganga Mekong Cooperation, I think there's a lot more happening with the Lakang Mekong Cooperation, which is the China-led Mekong Cooperation. They already have a 5-year strategy of what they want to do with the Mekong sub-region. And let's not forget the fact that geographically, China is in a better state with the Mekong sub-region because it's an upper riparian state of the Mekong River and others are lower riparian states. The Americans also have a U.S. Mekong Cooperation Agreement. Nothing much has happened in that, right? So I think there is a need to, as we talk about evolving regional architecture in the Indo-Pacific and not revolutionary architecture, not radical architecture. And I think that's the point. That's the point that we need to be careful about at Trump 2.0. That a radical revolutionary architecture is not going to serve anyone's purpose. We are navigating, we are adapting to evolving regional security architecture. And I think in that process, thinking through sub-regions is the way forward in terms of really looking at the building blocks of an Indo-Pacific regional security architecture, where the center is Southeast Asia from India's perspective. And I'll end with this, that Trump 2.0, when we think through Trump 2.0, India hasn't signed on to RCEP. Trump has threatened to walk out of IPEF. Where does that leave us? And I think that's where our trade and goods agreement review of that with the Southeast Asian countries, a review of the trade and agreement on services, a review of the fintech initiative that we are putting across, a review of whether the India-ASEAN economic cooperation has met its potential, which it has not. How do we put it from G2G to G2B to B2B, connecting. And I think I'll end with this. I think the crisis in Myanmar stands at the center of this. There is no exit policy without Myanmar. It is the land bridge to Southeast Asia. So how do we deal with the ramifications of the Myanmar crisis? How would the Trump 2.0 deal with this crisis? And how would India face the knock-on effects of great power competition in its immediate neighborhood? I think those are, let's say, the challenges which are knocking on our head, even if we think of the broader Indo-Pacific and more exalted versions of strategy like the Global South and South-South Cooperation. So neighborhood first, in real sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I agree that neighborhood first. And also what we require is not a revolutionary, impulsive, radical architecture or a strategy, but a long term. How the Chinese like to think. They were not bothered initially when Trump 2.0 or Trump is going to be re-elected, because the Chinese thinking has been, we look at the long term for a decade and not just 4 years. So we need to think on those lines, how we can construct the Indo-Pacific strategy for a long term rather than a short term for 5 years or for 5 years. And also, thank you again for putting in the Myanmar context to this. You started with Bangladesh. Yes, Bangladesh has come out with Indo-Pacific strategy. Myanmar remains our connect to Southeast Asia, which is the heart of global trade. And also the IMT, India, Myanmar, and Thailand connect. Moving on, and also to our partner in the Indo-Pacific, let's move to our next speaker, that is Rear Admiral Yamamoto. To you, Rear Admiral Yamamoto, I would like to ask a question. Japan has an Indo-Pacific strategy or a policy in place, much like most countries surrounding or even not surrounding, such as Canada, for instance. How do you see and what do you see as challenges and opportunities for India when we have Indo-Pacific strategy? And also, since we have been discussing about Trump 2.0, which has become a focal point in the Indo-Pacific, how do you see the change happening in this region? Over to you.
I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me again. I'm Admiral Yamamoto from Japanese American Self-Defense Forces, retired. So my first name is Katsuya. So my international friends call me Katz. So I'm very happy to join this Katz International Web Seminar. So thank you so much again. So now the existing international order is wavering, is climbing in the many parts of the world, including the Korean Peninsula or Gaza strips or Ukraine and so on. In order for the humanity to enjoy a peaceful, prosperous, and free society, a certain level of orders and norms as necessary. At the roots of this, it is important to respect the dignity of humanity, I believe. In order to achieve this, it is prerequisite to share common value, the respect of the difference and the diversity of each country, religion, nation, and culture. However, self-righteous on one side and authoritarian behavior is not acceptable. It is necessary to deter the self-righteous and coercive action of the few by the many with their diversity. For example, despite having one of the world's biggest, largest leading naval forces and coast guard, China deploys a fishermen as a maritime militia to harass neighboring countries on the front line beyond the warship or patrol boats. I call this ambiguous strategy a Chinese ambiguous strategy of the fishermen or militia, as I call the human shield at sea. In our international community that respects human dignity, that is not unacceptable behavior. To achieve this, countries with similar aspirations need to play their respective roles by making the most of their individual characteristics and to fully demonstrate the synergistic efforts of these roles. For example, in the domain of the maritime security arena, the first thing that comes to mind is the sharing the maritime domain awareness (MDA). MDA, maritime domain awareness, is seriously important for maintaining peace and safe the ocean and our human being, particularly the Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean is a very serious sea line communication route, not only for Japan and India, but also all of the world communities. Some countries believe they can monopolize the ocean that stretches out before them. However, we must remember that the ocean is a global commons that is open to the international community. Even if it is the territorial waters of the countries, if certain international rules are observed, ships from the other countries can also use these waters. Japan has an excellent MDA, maritime domain awareness capability in the Pacific front, and India has excellent capability in the Indian Ocean front. These capabilities not only contribute to the security of their own countries, but also to the security of the region and the international community, I believe. Domain awareness is not limited to the ocean, is not limited to the maritime. Maritime Domain Awareness Corporation is the same for the various domains, such as the space, cyberspace, and others. Japan and India could become a front runner of the corporation in each domain. Is the near future? No. We must become the front runners of the corporation for the domain of each domain awareness. So, and the second, just a short brief. I understand the next president of the United States of America, Mr. Trump, is trying to shift his focus point from the European front to Asia, to China. India and Japan are expected to play an important role in Trump's Chinese policy of the Trump new administration. I heard that the chemistry between Prime Minister Modi of India and Trump is good, I heard. Just as the relationship between the former Japanese Prime Minister Abe and Trump was. The arrival of the Trump administration will not create not bad for Japan and India. So we have a lot of the opportunity to step up our next future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for bringing in the Japanese perspective. And this is very important how you mentioned that Japan and India together, they're expected to play even a larger role in this region. With Trump 2.0, there would be disruptions, but disruption does not mean always bad. There are going to be good disruption, as you mentioned, space, AI, and related areas where Japan and India can collaborate and should collaborate moving forward. Thank you also for laying out the matchmaking between the two, especially with reference to maritime domain awareness. Also, with, as you mentioned, the relationship between Shinzo Abe, Trump, Modi, and also the Australian counterparts over the time. So we look forward to further engagements of Quad, and of course, IPMDA was one of the offshoots of the Quad grouping. Now, moving on quickly, since we have about under 10 minutes, there are some questions in the chat box. What I'll do is I'll pose few questions to each one of you, and then we can start with the answering. First, Captain Parmar, I'll come to you. We have covered most part of it, leaving Australia or Oceania. And since you were recently in Perth, this question is for you. How do you see India-Australia partnership in the current geopolitics of Indo-Pacific? What are the areas of cooperation or collaboration between two, apart from trade and defense? So this is for you, how future plays out. 2 minutes, and rest, I'll just distribute the questions. What was your perspective of India's engagement with Japan, especially in the Indo-Pacific region? Rear Admiral Yamamoto, you have explained very nicely. If you can focus a bit on the northeast part of India, where JICA, JETRO, and related organizations have been working. So how do you see northeast part of India coming into in the larger Indo-Pacific construct? How important is India's need to develop a blue water navy to counter Chinese aggression? Admiral Lanba, if you can take this one. Now coming back to neighborhood policy, Parmar sir mentioned what neighborhood policy, like today Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives. My question is that what are the main problems and where are we lagging in moving forward in the Indo-Pacific from vision document to strategic documents? This I get Dr. Monish, if you can take this one. And lastly, Dr. Pooja, if you can take this one, how is Chinese utilization of Kyuksu port in Myanmar going to bring in further naval capability potentially against India? So if you can bring in the Hambantota port and the other ports circling India in the Indian Ocean region also into the picture. So we'll start with you, Captain Parmar. 2 minutes so that we stick to the time, or 1.5 minutes.
I'll try to keep it shorter than that in any case.
Okay.
All right. So when you look at India, Australia, and you look at the map, we are in the Indian Ocean region, central part 1. Australia is stretched from the Indian Ocean region, the southeastern part extending towards the island side of the Pacific Ocean, if I can, sort of do that. So although there has been a very positive engagement between India and Australia, at times the interests waver. So therefore, there has always been a gap on discussions on the table and expectations and working out actually on the ground is how it works out. And of course, we've had our mismatches in between. There has been sort of political disinclination to continue certain aspects. But today, I think it's a different world. And we recognize that India, Australia need to work together. We are part of many minilaterals. I always keep getting back to trilaterals. One is the India, Australia, Indonesia trilateral, and the India, France, Australia trilateral, which I'm very happy to say is sort of has got some new life breathed into it. So when you look at these engagements, and apart from what defense and trade as the question is concerned, I think the one major area in which we can work together is connectivity. When you talk about connectivity, it is not only through ensuring safety of locks, but it also means submarine cables. I alluded it to in the morning, which is a big issue, especially for Australia, since its information flow comes via Singapore. And I think the other issue that we can work together is on MD. And Admiral Yamamoto was very clear when he said Japan has certain capabilities, we have certain capabilities. Australia, Singapore is already in the center, so you have your fusion center. Australia itself can set up, it's a recommendation in a paper of mine, as another spoke of a fusion center in Australia that covers that largely ignored area of the southern Indian Ocean that most of us take for granted. So if you look at the area south of the equator, you have very, very little maritime presence for many reasons. But today, due to rerouting of the Red Sea, and I don't see that problem going away very soon because you have a very active, violent non-state actor in that region, is that there is going to be more and more presence of maritime shipping in the southern Indian Ocean region that is going to flow from Lombok, Sunda, and directly from Malacca to the Cape. So this is an area where we can work at. And I'm very happy Admiral Yamamoto spoke about MDA. Thank you, sir, for that. But I think another area that we need to add very importantly, as you did mention other areas, the underwater domain. There is a lot of issues in the underwater domain. The High Seas Treaty may become a reality maybe in a year or two. Many issues of submarine cables. These are issues that we need to look at, especially with the advent of technology. And so these are areas that India, Australia need to look at. So the Southern Indian Ocean is covered in more detail. It's just an example. And I think more presence of India in the broader Pacific is there, but we do need a more active presence of Australia in our neighboring waters. Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal is another example, but it may stretch the Australians a little too much, but I think it needs to be done. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Next, Admiral Yamamoto, if you'd like to take the second question, just 1 minute, 1.5 minutes to be precise. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My answer is very simple. Is of course, as you know, so the Japan and India is not alliance. However, so we is a good partners and like-minded, very close partners. So the China. So we, India and Japan facing the China very big, huge powers. So the east and the west, northeast part of northeast India is a very important area for the influence to the China. So we can collaborate with the anything. So the 100% I believe that China worry about the collaboration, Japan and Indian collaboration, there's some activities. So this is a very important. So we not only our Japanese military community, but also our Japanese all many kind of the communities is very focusing the situation in the China-India borders, particularly the Northeast India. I'm very interesting about these areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Admiral Lanba.
Right. To start with, the Indian Navy is a blue water navy. I don't know why this doubt is there. We are the largest resident navy in the Indian Ocean by miles. At the moment, the Navy's strength is about 140 ships and over 230 aircraft. And there is a perspective plan in place where blue water units in the form of destroyers, frigates, nuclear submarines, tankers in the form of fleet support ships are all under construction, and the next generation of destroyer frigates are on the anvil. So the overall strength of the Navy is only going to increase in the coming decade. And the plans are to develop a Navy which will have a total strength of about, it was 200 ships, but now has been brought down to about 170. It's not only blue water platforms, we have also, along with partners, developed bases in the Indian Ocean region, have logistics agreements signed where operational turnaround of the ships can be done. So the reach of the navies have only gone by leaps and bounds, and we are present in our areas of interest 24/7. Like we have been in permanent deployment in the Gulf of Aden since October 2008 and have been the most active participant in countering piracy and providing support to ships carrying whichever flag. It's been in the news in the past 1 year, what's been happening in the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden. So there shouldn't be any doubt in anybody's mind that the Indian Navy is not a blue water force. We are a blue water force, and our capabilities are only going to increase in the coming decade.
Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Monish. This is the last question that we're going to take. If any panelists would like to answer, there are a few questions you may mention. I saw there are a few recommendations for book. One we can start right away is The Nine Dash Lines. Over to you, Dr. Monish.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll start it, just answer it this way that when you look at the neighborhood, some problems are problems of terms of engagement, which which are more policy questions with a long-term implication that we keep working on. But some of the problems are more volatile in nature, which are rapidly evolving as we speak. So it will not be right on my part to comment on those more volatile aspects of the neighborhood, which we very much know what I'm talking about. I think I'll just put it this way, that on a long term, or let's say even at a mid-term basis, we are dealing with what I would term as the post-Afghanistan US South Asia policy ramification. I've been writing about this for some time, that after 20 years of being bogged down in Afghanistan and seeing South Asia through the lens of Afghanistan war, the Americans freed themselves from that. But there was a lot of lull in terms of really understanding what the Americans are up to now. It's easy to talk about that we are going to shift focus to China, but what is their South Asia policy? Is it going to be more development oriented and engage with India, let's say in Sri Lanka, in building the parts of the Colombo port terminal, or as we did some good work with Japan, building the deep sea Matarbari port in Bangladesh. So there are a lot of projects like that. MCC in Nepal, for instance, where the Americans are involved. So I think India needs to brace up for what I would call as the second order effects of great power competition. What you are seeing in many of the South Asian states may not directly be aimed towards India, but we need to face the consequences of the unintended consequences also, which is the second order effects of great power competition. And I think that's where we need to do a lot of work in terms of communicating to the incoming administration in Washington very rapidly that what is their plan in South Asia? How do they want to take up the Bangladesh question? How do they want to take up the Myanmar question? How do they want to deal with the Taliban rule of Afghanistan? What is their plan in Sri Lanka? What do they want to do in Maldives? I think there needs to be a no holds barred communication between India and Washington if we are to be real strategic partners. If we are to be strategic partners and are to be stepped in the back without no knowledge of what they are doing in our neighborhood, I don't think we're up for that kind of strategic partnership. So I'm blunt here, but being an Americanist, I think I can be blunt. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that bold perspective into the picture. Dr. Pooja, did I miss you or did you answer the question?
Sorry, so I'll just quickly answer the port question. The thing is, China has been building a lot of ports across Indian Ocean region and across the world. The problem is not building ports. Every country is trying to, build ports for its increasing its economy. The thing with Chinese ports are they're dual-use infrastructure. So they're just not ports. They're also, come up with some kind of naval installation in those submarine, station. So the point is that is what is going to threaten the Southeast Asian security, and that's what we want to take into consideration. That no, and added to it is that now that India and so many region countries are trying to increase their trade, Chinese ports are also be an economic competitor to India, and a lot of regional countries are trying to build up their own ports and build up their trade-based economy. So I think we need to see these port development from these point of view, from strategic and as well as economic. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. We've just offshoot with 5 minutes, so that is all right. Thank you, our distinguished panelists, for joining me this evening. And this has been a learning curve, not just for the audience, but also later on when this goes on our YouTube channel. At CUTS, we have been working on rank model RANC, research, advocacy, networking, and capacity building. So the initial idea was to bring out a paper, then have a discourse such as this one, and then go on further building on the networking and the advocacy part for opening a larger Indo-Pacific security and strategy dialogue to take it upwards and onwards. How our strategy could be different from the rest could be cooperation rather than on rivalry. So cooperation over rivalry. That is what we should aim and look at, and broadly look at the 3 Ps, which is peace, prosperity, and partnership. Not just with the larger and the bigger nations, but also looking at the smaller, vulnerable yet very important nations. So thank you once again, and thank you audience for being so patient with us. I know you have some unanswered questions. Now that we all are living in this digital era age, I hope you guys can connect with our distinguished panelists, ask them one-to-one question. Otherwise, you'll see them very soon on some other platform imparting their knowledge and wisdom. Thank you once again, everybody. Have a good rest of the remainder of the day. And we look forward to another discussion very, very soon. Thank you once again. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and all the very best.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you and bye.